To own one single Bitcoin will one day be a status symbol. And this is not an original concept or idea, but I believe there absolutely is something to it. And I don't think it is going to be that much longer until this is the case. We are in and around all-time highs right now. Bitcoin is between $65,000-$70,000, and at that price range, a single Bitcoin is not yet a status symbol. And when I say status symbol, I'm talking about a status symbol for the rich, for the 1%. I believe it's going to be a status symbol, and it will have a much higher fiat-denominated price when that occurs. Eventually, it will be a status symbol, but without any relation to a fiat-denominated price. In other words, I envision a day in which owning a single Bitcoin will be unto itself a status symbol. There will be no reference to the fiat price. People will simply know that to own one Bitcoin is a very prestigious and elite benchmark to have accomplished. And it won't be because Bitcoin is $1 million or $2 million. It will be because one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, and there's only 21 million of them. It will be because there is only 21 and change million millionaires in the United States right now, which means there isn't even enough Bitcoin by the time all the Bitcoin in the world have forever been mined. There isn't even enough for every millionaire in the United States to have a single Bitcoin. A few would be left out. And that's excluding all the millionaires in the world beyond America. And that's excluding the fact that millions upon millions of people already own a bunch of Bitcoin. So it's very easy to see why Bitcoin will be a status symbol. To own one single Bitcoin is entirely arbitrary, really. The decimal point, or the decimal place that determines that there is 21 million Bitcoin and that there's 100 million Satoshis in each Bitcoin, it's arbitrary. Satoshi Nakamoto could have chosen that there's 21 billion Bitcoin, 21 trillion. What matters is not where the decimal point is. What matters is that it's fixed eternally. That's what matters. It just so happens that Satoshi Nakamoto chose a number, 21 million, which makes it so that at current fiat prices, we are already approaching a point where owning one is getting to be a pretty big deal. I mean, if you're the average middle-class American or Westerner, when you look at the average net worth and you take out fixed assets like a house and cars and stuff, and you're just looking at liquid assets, you exclude pensions, you're just looking at cash in the bank, liquid stocks, bonds, and so forth, the ability for even the middle class to own one Bitcoin it's getting to be, for the middle class, a bit of a status symbol. I mean, to buy one Bitcoin right now it's not you don't gamble, right? Back when Bitcoin was $3,000, it was easy for the middle class to throw $3,000 into Bitcoin, buy one Bitcoin, and who cares if it goes to zero? You lose $3,000. For the middle class, if you have a lot more liquid assets than that, it's not really a big deal. You'll recover very quickly. You won't really even feel the pain of losing $3,000. But for the middle class to put down, $80,000, $75,000 right now to buy one Bitcoin, that hurts if you lose that. That hurts. And that's why It's a bigger deal. It's more of a risk for someone who's with middle class means, the liquid assets to be able to pull the trigger on buying a Bitcoin right now. It's a big deal. It's a big commitment. And yet, I absolutely believe that what we see right now is happening with Bitcoin's prices. People are realizing that depending on your socioeconomic background, the window of opportunity to buy that one Bitcoin is closing. And there's a lot of people, I think, who have the ability to buy one Bitcoin, and they know that it's their last chance for them. One day, it will be the last chance for not for the middle class, but for the elites, for the 1%. For a long time, they have been able to accumulate a lot of Bitcoin, and they, by and large, have not done so. The day will come, one day, where the 1%, if you want to call them that, they will be liquidating a lot of their liquid assets or even their fixed assets to own one Bitcoin, because it is so scarce. To own one Bitcoin, when considering how many people there are in the world, when considering how much wealth can compete to buy that one Bitcoin, it really is it's almost a terrifying proposition when you think about it. Well, just thinking about how absolutely scarce Bitcoin is, and to think that there's only 21 million whole units of it. Even though that's arbitrary, you can't underestimate the power of these psychological benchmarks. The difference between 0.99 Bitcoin and 1 Bitcoin is entirely just a matter of fractions and so forth. When it comes to the actual math of it, the math doesn't care about the arbitrary benchmark of going into a whole number. Math doesn't care about that, but people do. Psychology does. Absolutely. And it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop, a psychological one. Because as a single Bitcoin becomes a status symbol for the middle class, suddenly the I don't really want to call them the elites, but the professionals, the lawyers and the doctors, the high income earners, six-figure salaries plus. Once that class starts to look at the middle class of viewing a single Bitcoin as a status symbol, it's not long before they themselves realize that, I really need to get that one Bitcoin. And it's just a cascading effect that goes up the socioeconomic ladder. Before you know it, it's not just high income earners that are viewing it as a status symbol. Now you have your CEO types, the ones who make salaries of $1 million plus. What happens when for them they need to really seriously decide if they pull the trigger on getting a single Bitcoin? Well, they can or not. And I predict that that moment will occur for them. That they will confront that terrifying proposition, that terrifying realization that their opportunity to own one Bitcoin, it may be closing. It may be the last chance that they have. And when they view what's happening for everyone else under them, how everyone else under them sees a single Bitcoin as a status symbol, things get pretty interesting. So I don't think it's a very difficult or controversial prediction to make at all that a single Bitcoin will be a status symbol. As I mentioned, I don't think that this is at all an original idea or thought. Of course, this has been talked about for a long time. We're starting to actually see it happen in practice. But a point that I want to make here is that this is a very interesting mechanism on Bitcoin's part, a sort of defense mechanism. I've mentioned before how the hash rate that protects the Bitcoin network is only one form of defense that Bitcoin has. It's it's sort of the inner keep. It's the final line of defense. But Bitcoin has these rings of defense outside of that inner defense, that inner fortress. And one of these rings of defense appears to be this sort of this social defense mechanism in which it builds a prestige around itself, a prestige that is itself a defense mechanism. The prestige of holding a single Bitcoin, to the extent that that continues to become more valued for more and more people, to the extent that it becomes more of a status symbol further up the socioeconomic food chain, to the extent that that occurs, it creates an entire community of defenders of Bitcoin, defenders of Bitcoin in the social sphere, in the economic sphere, in the political sphere. It creates a sort of social hash rate, because the more and more people view a single Bitcoin as a status symbol, the more and more people attempt to buy or do buy a single Bitcoin just for the status of owning it. To the extent that that occurs, you have more and more people who have invested not just economically, but socially in Bitcoin. And therefore, they have skin in the game. They have a reason to defend Bitcoin against social, political, and economic attacks. They are a sort of, like I said, a social hash rate. And now, if you have let's say the SEC decides that we need to ban Bitcoin, well, what happens when the people who run the SEC themselves own Bitcoin? Because, of course, the people who run the SEC, it's a revolving door with Wall Street. It's Goldman Sachs executives, Morgan Stanley executives, or whatever. It's a revolving door. And to the extent that these Wall Street banks are now getting into Bitcoin, well, the banks themselves are going to hold Bitcoin. The people who work at these institutions are going to own Bitcoin. What happens when the people who are the regulators themselves own Bitcoin? The companies, the corporations, Wall Street banks that they are coming from own Bitcoin. Congressmen own Bitcoin. What happens when the elites that run the world, the controllers, what happens when they themselves have an economic stake and indeed a social stake in protecting Bitcoin, in protecting the prestige of Bitcoin? It's a social hash rate. It's a sort of defense mechanism in a different sphere other than computer science, other than cryptography. So that's why I think it's very important that institutions are getting into Bitcoin, that the rich and the wealthy are getting into the Bitcoin. To the extent that they do, and to the extent that they view Bitcoin as a prestigious asset, pristine collateral, or even that they view owning one Bitcoin as a status symbol, a social status symbol. To the extent that that occurs, Bitcoin creates this moat around itself where it becomes very difficult for governments to ban it. The people who work in the governments themselves view it as a status symbol. They own it because it is a status symbol. They no longer have an incentive to attack it. The system itself comes to be forced to accept Bitcoin. At least in the West, I'm having a difficult time envisioning scenarios in which there's a hardcore crackdown, because, like I've demonstrated in a prior video regarding Fidelity, which has, 4 or 5 trillion dollars under assets under management. They report that 90% of their institutional clients have an interest in Bitcoin. Now, it's just an interest for now, but I think that number is very interesting. Everyone is interested in Bitcoin now. Big money is interested. Once big money goes beyond being interested and goes to being invested, once the big money has skin in the game, banning Bitcoin is pretty much off the table, at least in the West, at least in the areas where there has been the green light for institutional adoption, which we have seen in much of the West. To the extent that occurs and has occurred, it's only a matter of time before that 90% of interest turns into 90% skin in the game. And then you get your pensions and your university endowment money, and you get all this kind of money flowing into Bitcoin. It doesn't take very long until you get to a point where, the saying, too big to fail? Well, Bitcoin becomes too big to ban. And I think the reason that we will get to that point is precisely because Bitcoin will be viewed as a status symbol. It will be too big to ban because too many powerful people will have their social, economic, and political power directly tied in with Bitcoin. And at that point, Bitcoin is too big to ban. At that point, Bitcoin it's not going anywhere. It's cemented itself essentially forever. And that is the process that I see occurring in real time. And I don't think that we're very far from this occurring at all. There's going to be a Bitcoin is too big to ban moment, and I believe it will be sooner than you might think, not decades in the future. And all of that will be because Bitcoin is a status symbol, and it will be because Bitcoin, not just that it's a status symbol, but because it has this defense mechanism, it has this way of creating social, economic, and political moats around itself.